As a generation that's lived through what could be considered the most important period in the development of graphical technology for video games, it can be easy to forget just how far we've come and how quickly we got here. I mean, not even 30 years ago, the vast majority of games being developed were entirely 2D, and now today we have the capability to make games so realistic they look like real life. It's honestly pretty cool and just a bit scary when you think about it like that. However, as the graphical fidelity of games has gotten higher and higher over the years, a certain argument has cropped up among gaming enthusiasts. That argument is over whether or not a game's graphics can affect your enjoyment of said game. Now, I know where I stand on this argument, but before we talk about my personal opinion, let's take a step back and look at the big picture here. And the best way to do that I could come up with is to look at the extremes. On one side, you have the idea that games that don't have cutting-edge or close to cutting-edge graphics are unplayable. The further someone leans towards this extreme, the more likely they are to only play big-budget AAA games. Now, personally, I don't blame any individual that subscribes to this sort of ideology when it comes to video games. The reason for that is that the gaming industry as a whole has been pushing graphics as a major selling point for longer than 3D games have even existed. There's been 8-bit versus 16-bit, 16-bit versus 32-bit, 2D versus 3D, SD versus HD, 1080p versus 4K, ray tracing, the list goes on. So many gaming companies have used the quality of their graphics to show that their games are good, so obviously some people have grown to equate quality graphics with a quality game. As for why so many gaming companies have used graphics as a selling point over the years, well, that's a simple one. When you're showing someone a game for the first time, usually the first thing they're going to notice is how it looks. Now, of course, just because you like the way a game looks doesn't mean you're going to like how it plays, but by the time you figure that out, you've already given the company your money, so what do they care? People in general respond more favorably to something that's visually appealing when compared to something that's not, so it makes sense that a company would use this to their advantage. However, there's a problem with this philosophy of game development and marketing that presumably a lot of game developers didn't foresee. That problem is that since developers have kept pushing and pushing for better graphics so that their games will be perceived as good and consequently sell well, they've pushed the cost and time required to make cutting-edge graphics through the roof. This has had the side effect of largely preventing smaller indie companies from being able to efficiently create graphics on par with larger game studios. In my opinion, this is one of the main reasons many quote-unquote hardcore gamers don't play indie games. Like I said, the first thing many people notice about a game when watching a trailer or other such video are the visuals, so when someone who's been conditioned to only accept the highest quality graphics sees a lower budget game, they immediately dismiss it as inferior simply because it doesn't look like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart or Horizon Forbidden West. Now, by this point, I'm sure there are some people out there who are thinking, that doesn't really happen. People don't judge games solely on the graphics. And to that I say, go back and look at the reaction to the initial reveal of Elden Ring's gameplay. People were excited, sure, but that was mostly because they knew a FromSoft Souls-like game would be fun no matter what, not to mention the general hype around the game. But even with the massive hype and confidence in the developer, many people were still put off by the lower quality graphics when compared to the best of the current generation. Now, of course, Elden Ring would go on to prove itself as a great game and gain incredible popularity as a result, but what about games that don't hit that once-in-a-lifetime level of popularity? When it comes to those games, I'm sure many gamers will give them a look, decide the graphics aren't up to their standards, and then they'll move on and never look back, potentially missing out on an excellent experience. That's the unfortunate truth of this side of the graphical argument that many gaming companies have helped foster over the years. Contrary to this, we have the other side of the argument where people don't care about graphics at all. Someone who leans to this side of things will have no problem playing older games and indie games because they're in it for the experience, not the graphics. Now, personally, I believe this side to be less detrimental to the gaming industry, which just intrinsically makes it better than the other side, in my opinion. If we all could put more value in the visual style of a game and the way it plays, rather than the pure graphical fidelity, I believe there wouldn't be anything but positives for players and developers alike. However, if I'm being honest, I'm not 100% convinced many people that say they belong to this group actually follow through with what they say. Using Elden Ring as an example again because it's fresh on the mind, many people came to that game's defense when graphics were brought up as a negative, saying, it's not about the graphics, it's about the visual style, or it's the gameplay that matters. I'd be curious to see how many people that made these claims actually still play games from before the HD era. I don't know why, but I'm willing to bet not as many as you might think. In my opinion, when some people make these claims, they're talking within the context of cutting-edge gaming. They're okay defending Elden Ring because it's not that far from the graphical level of, say, Demon's Souls Remake, but I highly doubt many of these people will be going back and playing games from the N64 era anytime soon, simply because those games are too old. If it's all about gameplay and art style, then why isn't everyone playing something like Wave Race? That game is a ton of fun and the art style is top-notch, so by the logic here, they should all have no problem riding the waves in 2022. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating here, but the point is, many people that defend lower quality graphics also have limits on how far they're willing to go, which is important to keep in mind. But okay, now that we have an idea of what's going on here, let's talk about my opinion on this argument. Personally, I don't think I fit into either major extreme perfectly. On the one hand, I do firmly believe in art style and gameplay over graphical fidelity, but I'm also not so close-minded as to say that graphical quality has never elevated an experience I've had gaming. For example, there's no doubt in my mind that my experience playing Ghost of Tsushima on PS5 has been enhanced by just how high quality the graphics are in that version of the game. On many an occasion, I found myself just walking around aimlessly admiring the landscape. And before you say it, yes, art style did play a major role in this as well, but for me it wasn't just the art style, it was the actual fidelity of the game as well. The same can be said for Demon's Souls Remake and Ratchet & Clank. So what I'm saying here is that in my opinion, entirely discounting graphical fidelity as an enhancer to one's enjoyment of a game is disingenuous. As I said earlier, people naturally like stuff that looks good, so making a game look better isn't inherently a bad thing. However, that does not mean that games with lower fidelity reduce my enjoyment. On the contrary, I believe many games benefit from a lower polygon count in the same way many games benefit from a high one. A great example of this, in my opinion, is Banjo-Kazooie, or any rare game from the golden era, really. I honestly think that those games would have been worse off if they weren't low poly. The style just works for them. I'm sure it was a product of the limitations of the time, but I personally wouldn't have had it any other way. This is another problem with pushing graphical fidelity as the be-all and end-all of a game. Since companies are so focused on making games look as high quality as possible, we've all but lost the charm that comes with a lower poly game, which is a really big shame in my opinion. I personally would love to see companies like Nintendo specifically choose to use older N64 or GameCube era graphics on a new game just because that's the style that they're going for, and they believe it will benefit the game. Now, do I ever believe this will happen? Probably not, but I guess we have HD 2D now, and that seems to be doing pretty well, so who's to say HD 64 isn't next? But now that we've talked about one side of my opinion, let's move on to the other. So, if you're someone who's watched a few of my videos, you'll know I play everything from the PS5 to the NES. I genuinely believe that things like art style and gameplay should always come first, even if the fidelity of a game can enhance the experience. Going back to Ghost of Tsushima, sure I had a great time checking out the scenery, but if that's all there was, I would have stopped playing after like 5 minutes. It was elements like the fun gameplay, great music, and eye-catching art style that kept me hooked for hours. The fidelity of the game was just the cherry on top of the giant multi-layered sundae underneath. As we all know, nobody eats a sundae just for the cherry on top, and in my opinion, nobody should play a game just for the graphical fidelity. But anyway, I think that's a pretty good place to leave things. Thanks for sticking with me until the end, it always means a lot. If you have any opinions on the whole graphical fidelity debate, I'd love to read them in the comments below, and if you happen to enjoy today's video, consider giving it a like, it's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Back out.